Hello, and welcome to Farnborough Connect's opening panel with senior industry leaders from civil and defence aerospace. This is a remarkable moment in the history of aerospace, aviation, and defence. I'm sure that it is one of the deepest crises that we've had in post-war history in these sectors. And we have with us a group of industry leaders to talk to us about how they're experiencing that crisis, but more importantly, how they intend to come through this particular period. So I hope that you will find a lot here of value to you, to learn from, to listen to. And I know that I certainly am looking forward to hearing from our panel today. We have with us Guillaume Faury, Chief Executive of Airbus. Welcome, Guillaume. Charles Woodburn, Chief Executive of BAE Systems. Jackie Sutton, co-chair for the Women in Aviation and Aerospace Charter and Chief Customer Officer at Rolls-Royce. We have Victoria Foy, recently appointed Chief Executive of Safran Seats in the UK. Alessandro Profumo of Leonardo, the Italian Defence Group. And Tony Wood, Chief Executive of Meggitt and President of the Aerospace Industry Association, ADS. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like to start off by asking each one of you in turn a question about your company and the experiences and thoughts you have about the time that we're living through. So I'll start with Guillaume. Guillaume, you said previously that Airbus is facing the gravest crisis in the company's history. It would be interesting just to hear from you just how serious is it? Is this exaggeration, or is it truly a moment where the question of the company's future is in doubt? And how long do you think it'll take to recover? How do we get out of this crisis? What will the world look like in 3 or 4 years?
Hello, Peggy. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Well, yes, it is the gravest crisis in our history, but it's also the gravest crisis of the history of commercial aviation. And as we are a company predominantly operating in that sector, that's the reason why I said that this is the gravest crisis ever of the company. It doesn't mean that we will not be there moving out of the crisis, on the contrary, but we need to adapt. And we need to adapt to a crisis, to a situation that was in none of our risk scenarios. It's really something that was not planned and not to that extent. And we went from a very short-term, immediate situation of the aviation of the world being grounded to a situation where the airlines themselves have to adapt to a situation which is lasting months and maybe years. And this has a big impact on aviation as a whole. And we went from what was at the beginning potentially a short-term crisis to something that we believe will last for 3 to 5 years, if not more. I think what we have lost is certainty, is visibility. And we are in an industry where we need that visibility. We are a long-term industry. We are with products that have long lead times and with contractual frameworks with airlines and with our supply chain, which is also based on these long lead times. Therefore, we are taken off guard. And it was a lot about inventing the ways of adapting to that situation with initial responses that had to fit with a new situation. We are adapting to this as a company. We have taken many decisions. We have reorganized everything, basically. And we are resizing the company to a new point. We are adapting to a new situation where we think we will be rather stabilized for the next 1 or 2 years. And then there will be a ramp up, or there will be a longer stabilization, or maybe another situation to face in 2021 or 2022. That's why we believe we cannot just wait for things to go better, but we have to take the right decisions to adapt the company to that new situation and to be able to, in 2021 or 2022, either ramp up again, which we all hope, when we will be back to some normality in this industry, or if there is a new situation, a new crisis, or a longer effect of the pandemic, be able to adapt again. And what is important for us is to be able to be back into the competition, to be back in the race with the ability to invest. So we need to digest the short-term impact of the crisis to be back to, or to come to a new point of stabilization that maybe is the Airbus that we were 10 or 15 years ago in terms of size, but with, again, the ability to innovate, to invest, because the need for investment, the need for the appetite for decarbonized flight and growing the aviation without an impact on environment is very strong. And we think that there is probably even more than before the need to do the right investments now to prepare the future. So we have this very short-term contradiction between less means to invest and more need to invest. And this is what we are tackling. And I think we are on that path, facing reality. I think that's what is extremely important in that situation, not to be in denial or not trying to refuse what pandemic, what COVID-19 is creating in the world. We were still 2 weeks ago with 2% of the passenger traffic on long-distance international flights. And it shows that being able to navigate the situation with this impact, with the magnitude of the impact on international travel is really massive. But it shows as well that the priority for us is to see this air traffic to recover, to start again. We see some positive signs on domestic flights and regional flights for the medium-range planes. I mean, Europe, US, in China. This is recovering, but the long-distance flight, the international routes are still idle, and we have a large share of the international fleet, of the commercial fleet, which is on the ground. So that's the new world we're in. We are forced to be fast. We need to anticipate. It's about risk management, but also looking at the opportunities and not forgetting that at the end, there's a business, there's an activity, but we need to compete and we need to be fit, whatever ahead of us. So that's what happened in the last month. A lot of work, less work, but more work of adapting, less planes to produce, but more changes in the company at a fast pace with all the industry. And that's really what has been quite amazing, is to see the solidarity in the industry of having everyone around the table to adapt. We have 3,200 suppliers at Airbus that are providing parts for our planes. We have 500,000 parts a plane, and we have to have everybody moving at the same pace, in the same direction, coordinated. We need everybody alive to be able to sustain the crisis and then design and build the planes that we want for the future. That's basically what we've been doing, relying a lot on defense, space, helicopters, activities which have been by far less impacted, if impacted. And this balance is also important. And I see some of my colleagues, which are major defense players, and I think what they have experienced is probably very different from what we have seen. They've been more impacted by supply problems. We are very much impacted by demand problems coming from the situation of the airline. So I stop here. I don't want to be too long. I'm sure there are many other good and interesting feedbacks to get. So that's my initial answer to your question. That was a very broad one.
It was indeed. Thank you, Guillaume. And in fact, you've done my segue for me, which is fantastic, because I was going to then turn to the defense sector and ask Charles Woodburn of BAE Systems, what you see as the role for the defense industry in the post-pandemic world, and how you have lived this crisis, what you think is the most important lesson to draw out of it.
Well, Peggy, thanks, and great to be here and see everybody. I think, as Guillaume has already said, I mean, it has been it's been a challenging time for all of us, but I think others around this panel probably have felt it more acutely than we have, being a 90% defence portfolio business. We're not immune to it, I might add. I mean, we do have some exposure to civil air, and as Guillaume touched on already, within our supply chain, a lot of our suppliers are indeed heavily exposed to civil air. So that is an area of real concern for us looking forward. But I think to your question on defence, I think as this moves from being a health crisis into a fiscal crisis, I would like to think that defence can play a role in this. I mean, here in the UK, it's 100,000 highly skilled jobs in the defence sector. As you know, Peggy, we've got an integrated review running as we speak, looking at the future of defence budgets. And whilst historically defence has been very much focused on the threat-driven sort of defence and security needs, I think think defence has a real role to play in the recovery of this in terms of economic prosperity, making sure that we maintain those jobs, maintain that industrial base that will then take us forward. So, programs such as Tempest here in the UK are very important programs to really underpin the future economic recovery of the UK, and one would hope would also benefit some of those very same companies that are feeling significant exposure from civilian aerospace. So I think that it's up to us to make the case for that. I recognise that government budgets in the light of this pandemic globally are going to be very stretched. It's up to us to demonstrate value for money, but it's also around providing jobs. And I was pleased in BAE to be able to recommit to the hiring of record numbers of apprentices, 800 apprentices. I think we all agree around this panel, or expect us to agree, that young people are going to be disproportionately hurt through this pandemic in terms of job prospects. We're doing everything we can from our perspective, as some of our colleagues in the civilian aerospace are being forced into redundancies and layoffs, to find opportunities as best we can for some of those employees who are coming out. That really underpins my view that defence has a key role to play in the economic recovery from this very challenging pandemic situation.
Thank you, Charles. Actually, I was going to move on to diversity, but before I leave defence, I think I will go to Alessandro Profumo, because I think I want to stay with defence for a moment to ask the question that, as Charles said, it has been less affected. Defence has been less affected than civil aerospace to a certain extent. You also have a government customer who has key programs that have to be delivered, have to be paid for. There is no other choice for national security. I'm wondering whether it is the defense sector, which so often leads in technology, perhaps can really take the lead in technological development when a lot of the civil aerospace players are having to defer research projects. Is this an area, digital technology, digital manufacturing, is this an area that Leonardo is looking at, that defense can really play a leading role in?
First of all, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I'm sure that Guillaume won't delay any investment. He will try to do his best in order to keep the pace, mainly on new technology. So I don't think that this will be a significant difference. Clearly, the cash flow for all of us is under pressure, so we have to be very careful on the way we will manage our investment process. But I think that today is very clear for all of us that the digital world and the technological development, mainly in, if we talk of artificial intelligence or big data or simulation, augmented reality, are really the base for our future. So all of us, we have to continue to invest at a significant pace in this area. And the defense sector, as Charles just said, is really a key player in this domain. Clearly, this is the aim for all of us. Is incredibly important to be on this project with a significant strength. For us, the COVID period is tough. We sell 86% of our turnover abroad. So as Guillaume was saying, we don't have to be in a denial mode, but to continue to think on how to leverage on our capabilities and technology in order to be part of the recovery of our countries and of Europe. So I think that this is an incredibly important period for defense, the defense sector. What will happen at European level is relevant. I think that all of us on both sides of the channel, we have to push in order to have an agreement as well on defense when we are talking of Brexit, because I think this is really a key element for all of us. We are incredibly interconnected, so that to have a disruption due to Brexit would add another problem on top of the COVID issues. So, and as Charles was saying, the defense sector is really important in terms of development of capabilities for young people. We are hiring a lot of new researcher in our Leonardo labs, so I think it's very important. We are not delaying any investment in this area.
Okay, well, and I'm wondering, one of the next questions then will be for all of you about thinking about this opportunity to do things differently through this crisis, thinking about what needs to change as we come out of it. I presume one of the things that we should look at when we're looking at nurturing young people is diversity. And for that question, I'd like to go to Jackie Sutton, the co-chair of the Women in Aviation Aerospace Charter. You've just taken this over. Are you hopeful? I mean, if there is a bright side to the crisis, are you hopeful that this will help you achieve some of the things that the Charter sets out, the targets for a more diverse and inclusive workforce?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to join, because I think what's really key, both from the Charter perspective, but also something we've discussed a lot in the leadership team within Rolls-Royce as well, is that the COVID crisis has clearly taken its toll on people in different ways and to varying extents. And from the research that we've done, and Charles is quite right to reference the impact on young people, but also it's quite evident from the research we've done, but also external research, that it's also taking its toll on a lot of women who are ending up taking primary childcare or home life responsibilities, as well as continuing to work from home. And we feel that that's both positive on the one hand, in that it's introducing some maybe more familiarisation with flexible working, but also it can be negative in terms of historical experience in relation to restructuring programs, voluntary severance, and if you look at the statistics, it can quite often be women that put their hands up to volunteer to leave at the time when a company's restructuring. So it's kind of timely to be very mindful of all of those things, because we want to grab the opportunities, not just see the threats come to pass. And as you referenced, I'm the incoming co-chair of the Women in Aviation Aerospace Charter. And I was approached actually during the COVID crisis to do it, in between phone calls with customers about real issues that are out there in the market. And I absolutely jumped at the chance to do it. And my primary reasons were actually personal rather than professional. And I just want to put it out there that I recognise that from time to time, there can be in our industry a certain amount of fatigue in relation to the subject of gender diversity, perhaps in more general sense as well. So I just wanted to highlight why it's important to me, because some of the reasons can actually be quite subtle as to why more women don't progress through organisations. And in my personal case, when I was kind of mid-career, I was lucky enough to be given an external mentor around a programme that was specifically designed to try and encourage more women through their organisations. And at the time, I was kind of quite taken aback and a bit put out, to be honest. I thought, why do I need to be singled out for special treatment? I've got here through my own merits. My performance should speak to itself, for itself. And this very thoughtful and smart mentor, a man, by the way, guided me to some research and asked me to consider it and to look at it as to some of the reasons. And I was absolutely stunned to read what I saw, because it was like looking in the mirror. And I won't go into all the examples, but one that still sticks with me today related to what can often happen when a woman is seen as key talent and is offered quite a big jump in terms of a job. And it had happened to me the previous year, where the first words out of my mouth were, "Oh no, you can't give me that. I'm not ready for it." So thankfully for me, the individual in question was thoughtful enough to see past that initial reaction, to listen through the words that I was using, and to actually take the time to encourage me, to point out the things that I could do, and all of those skills, are so critical at times like this as much as anywhere. A lot of people are feeling anxiety, and there's a tendency in women to self-select out of an opportunity. And it just really won me over to the importance of this kind of mentoring, of coaching, of helping, firstly, line managers hear and listen closely to what it is that's coming towards them in terms of what someone might be saying, because sometimes they might think that it's kind not to put an individual into that job, whereas actually all that person needed was the encouragement. So both for the line manager, but and also for women such as myself who may be tempted to use language like that, just to think through what the unintended consequences could be. So I'm completely sold on particularly the power of micro interventions such as mentoring in order to really help with the progression of pulling through the talent that I really believe we need if we want a kind of more balanced industry.
Thank you, Jackie. I mean, obviously, we want to think about diversity in all its shapes and forms. I'm going to move on now to Victoria, because another form of diversity maybe is nationality. You are working for the UK arm of a French company, and I think and you took over quite recently, and I think it would be interesting in the context of your recently having taken over to ask you about how you see yourself in that context, how you see the UK operations of a French company, and what the sort of thinking is of the UK's role in that French company at this time of crisis.
So, good morning, everybody. First of all, I thank you for having me, and I hope you can hear me, because I think we do have a little bit of COVID fatigue right now with the system, so I'm not connecting too well with you. So I hope you can hear me okay. So yes, Peggy, I really resonate actually with a lot of what Jackie was saying earlier, and indeed, I know this is not specifically the question you asked me, but I really recognise the strength of having a strong mentor, who indeed was the case for me when I was given the role and the opportunity here at Saffron Seats GB. And you speak about, you asked the question about how we fit in with France. Well, we in UK Saffron Seats GB is the UK division of Saffron Seats, a business that was acquired by Saffron back in 2008. And going into this CEO of Saffron Seats GB, it was quite an exciting opportunity for me. We'd recently been successful to win some new contracts. We were at a position whereby our in-production programs were reaching a really high rate. And quite literally, and for us in the UK and at Saffron Seats in France globally, the impact of COVID was very much around the end of February, beginning of March. So from a UK interview, well before UK lockdown. And that was when the airlines, who were clearly suffering because of low passenger volumes, decided that they had to take choices which are clearly driven by their liquidity and situation, to reschedule and to even potentially cancel some of their orders with us, pretty much as Guillaume said earlier. So for me, in my first few weeks and months as CEO of Saffron Seats GB, instead of ramping up, we literally had to put the brakes on, reverse, and deal with the crisis by adapting and really taking some difficult decisions, particularly with regard to reduction in workforce at a very earlier time. But again, as I think one of my colleagues just said previously, one of the challenges that we have is to ensure that we invest, and particularly invest in line with the airline's needs. So in this time of crisis that's heavily linked to the pandemic, how can we, in aircraft cabins and aircraft seating, innovate and develop with the airlines technology which will give confidence to the passenger, so that they will be comfortable to start to travel once more. So really that summarises my initial few weeks and months within Zephyr Seats, GB.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. And I think I'm going to ask Tony to sum up at the end, because this is going to be one of the most critical moments for us in terms of what we invest in and how we think about aerospace aviation going forward. I think one of the big questions that we all have is, what will the industry look like when we come out of this? Will we be investing in sustainability? If we're having to defer a lot of investment in new technology in order to preserve our cash and focus on the here and now, what are we doing? What do we need to come out the other side and to have a sustainable aerospace industry?
Well, thank you, Peggy. And I think there is no escaping the fact that this is the gravest crisis that certainly the commercial aviation industry has ever felt. And that said, the impact is going to be severe, and the recovery is obviously going to take some time. But we should be reassured by the fact that the world will fly again, and that there's no question that the combination of the need for a global sustainable aviation system that connects people, business, and populations around the world, that underpins global trade, and also the defense and security capabilities that are provided by many of those companies in the UK that have a combination of both civil aerospace and defense and security capabilities. That requirement's not going to go away. In fact, it's needed now more than ever. We should also be reassured by the fact that some 80% of the population of the world have still to take their first flight on an aircraft. And as the global population continues to grow and prosperity improves, aviation has the responsibility to provide the technologies and the capability to enable that to happen on a sustainable basis. So our ask of government in terms of making sure that despite the severe and the huge challenges that many of those companies in aerospace and defense are facing, is to work with industry, an industry that in the UK supports some 375,000 jobs in companies from Cornwall right up to the Shetland Isles, and support them in 4 simple ways. The first priority is that sustainable aviation is the grand challenge of the world. Whilst aviation is a small contributor, around 2% of greenhouse gas emissions today, that percentage gets bigger not only as aviation grows, but as other industries obviously reduce their carbon footprint. So we want to partner with government, a unique opportunity to accelerate the creation of the technologies for sustainable aviation. We'll do that, or we'd like to see that happening by doubling the funding that's going into the Aerospace Technology Institute in the UK. And it's completely aligned with the ambitions to deliver on Jet Zero, so net zero carbon emissions from aviation by 2050. The second opportunity is really very much one of self-help. We want government to accelerate those defense programs, space programs, and security programs that will benefit all of those suppliers and keep them engaged in production and technology programs during these difficult times. That's a capital allocation decision for the UK and very much within the grasp of government. And it's programs like Tempest that Charles was talking about that's one big opportunity to do that. The third opportunity is that we're inviting government to work with us on schemes that can be used to help those companies when they come off the short-term government support of furloughs and some of the CBILS and the CCFF funding schemes that have been very effective, but ultimately do need to be replaced as we move forwards. And the invitation is to work with the Business Investment Bank to try and create a means of funding that can replace some of those short-term support packages and enable those SMEs, particularly in the UK, to grow beyond this crisis with a balance sheet that's strong enough to do that. And then finally, and importantly, and it's been alluded to by some of the other panelists, we're very grateful for the support government has offered to incentivize new apprenticeships being offered in the UK, and companies like BAE Systems, Leonardo, and also Meggitt, where we're still committed to continue our intakes this year. But we need to ensure that those that are on current schemes get the opportunity to complete their training schemes and transition into roles. And they're people that are under a lot of pressure at the moment as companies resize. It's the younger end and the less experienced end of the workforce that is difficult for some of these SMEs particularly to support. And we'd like to see government further enhancing the support for apprenticeships by helping companies with continuing to complete those existing schemes. So four significant and important measures that we see will position the UK to emerge stronger from the crisis and are well aligned with the requirements of both the world to have a more sustainable environment, but also creating those skills across the industry during this very difficult transition.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Well, now I'm just going to freewheel with a few questions as well now, just coming back to this idea of, it strikes me that the theme of today is very much sustainability and the supply chain and diversity. And I'll start off with sustainability, that it feels to me when I sit here from the outside, and I've heard for many years about the need to create the decarbonize flying and electric and hybrid electric and hydrogen. It feels to me that we are now at a moment, as I said earlier, it's almost a clean sheet. We're getting rid of lots of employees. We're reducing our capacity across the board in many companies, many parts of the industry. We're ramping down, as you said, Guillaume, going back to the size of Airbus maybe 10, 15 years ago. Isn't this the opportunity to restart in a completely different way? Isn't this the time to say, actually, we've got a clean sheet, we can rebuild better? I know that's a phrase, but we really can. And I want to know, why on earth are we even thinking that the next platform to come out might even be conventionally powered? Isn't it the time to accelerate all of those developments, to accelerate that technology and say, we will commit here and now that the next platform will be very, very different? And I think in addition to that, I think I'd like to ask the question, if you could address, what are you doing to make sure your supply chain can keep up with you when you're talking about sustainable aviation? Because we do know that the supply chain is far more vulnerable than many of you. You're very big companies. Yes, you're hurting very badly, but you have a supply chain of thousands of companies that might be just a handful of employees, but providing critical parts that maybe don't have the cash. And with many of you looking at reviewing your footprint, a lot of suppliers are bracing for a very difficult period, and that applies both in defense and aerospace. So I'm going to throw it over to Guillaume first. Is this the clean sheet moment?
Yeah, Peggy, well, we shouldn't believe that we were idle before the crisis. Actually, it's the opposite. We had a lot on our plate, we were growing, we were investing a lot. And I think the challenge is to keep investing in spite of the crisis that is taking away a lot of our investment capacity. And that's why we've worked with governments to get support. There are opportunities in the crisis, and we're trying to take maximum out of them. But one of the challenges is to be able to keep working on the projects we had. We have today urban air mobility objects, VTOLs, eVTOLs that are flying at Airbus. This is the result of investment we have made over the years to prepare the technologies and the systems for the decarbonized commercial aviation at a later stage. This is a lot of investment, and it's more difficult to do it now in the new environment. That's why we want to adapt very quickly. That's why, in the meantime, we welcome the support we can get from anyone, including from governments. And we're very much aware of the fact that it's not only the OEMs, but it's also the innovation in the supply chain, in the ecosystem. And we've worked very closely with some friends around the call today and others to be able to organize that support to the whole ecosystem. In the UK, and with the leadership of ADS, and Tony plays a role, we have as well appointed Tom Williams, that is a former Airbus top executive, to come back from retirement and help us to organize the support we can give to the suppliers to make sure nobody will be missing when we will be on the other side of that crisis, and in the meantime, that we can keep investing. So many things are made more difficult with the crisis, and one of our challenges is to keep moving forward at a good pace. That's a lot of effort. Yes, there are opportunities to do things different. A crisis is full of opportunities, but they are not easy to tackle, and that's what we're doing with partners. In most of the cases, innovation is at the border between companies or between functions or between technologies, and as we're speaking to each other much more than in normal times, as we are analyzing together what we can do different, where we can be faster, leaner, cheaper, because of necessity, we are accelerating on a number of opportunities. What is interesting in that situation is that for aviation, the mega trends, the priorities, well, they remain the same. It's just that we have less time and less money to make it happen. So we need to be much more innovative. We need to be more clever. And it's very good that we can be supported by governments. In normal times, the majority of the investment are funded by private money. We are at a time where we need this strong collaboration between governments and sectors, in that case, in the aviation sector, to find a way to still be the strong innovators, to generate the jobs, the prosperity, the business that we need for the next 2 or 3 decades. That's a bit the way I see it. So it's not that we take everything off the table and we start from scratch. There's a lot already ongoing, and we shouldn't be naive to believe that it has no value. On the contrary, it has a lot of value, but we need to navigate the situation to be able to find the right way of doing it still in difficult times, at a faster pace, with less money, and emerge still being very competitive or even more competitive, but in a different landscape. And as I said in my introduction, we have to be aware as well that there might be another crisis behind this one. We see a lot of international tensions. We see that the world is really changing very fast, and therefore we need to be able to keep doing things in an environment that will remain challenging, where we see cyber threats, where we see new entrants, where we see new trends arriving very quickly, where we see digital playing a big role, and with digital playing a big role, you have newcomers as well in your industry. That's what I say, and I think what we've seen working well is this partnership spirit in our countries, between the companies, with the governments, at a level that we've not seen, I think, for years.
Thank you, Guillaume. Again, actually, I might go to Victoria. Just as a supplier, Victoria, do you feel that love and care from the OEMs that Guillaume's talking about? That support, is that something that you are actually feeling? Are you working better with the OEMs?
That's a very good question, and not just because Guillaume is on the call today will I say yes, of course we are. So we of course, our customers, as I already spoke to, are the airlines. So we directly contract with the customer, but a key partner with us in that are the OEMs, such as Airbus and Boeing, of course. And it's really key that in order to deliver what we do that in partnership with Airbus. So yes, I mean, you spoke about the supply chain, and as I said earlier when I made my introduction, we suffered from early part of this crisis with the rescheduling from our airlines. That was very quickly followed by the rescheduling from the OEMs themselves. So we had 2 waves of shock as a minimum in our business. But throughout that, we have worked absolutely very closely with the OEMs and Airbus in particular in more recent history. And yes, as we come out of this, we will do so together with the OEMs. And in fact, if I can just add to that, I spoke earlier about the fact that we've been successful to win some new business prior to COVID. And in the outcome of COVID and the fact that these programs are being delayed and paused, I actually find that the collaboration between Safran Seats, and in particular Safran Seats GB, and I can speak to that more capably, is stronger today with Airbus than it was before. And actually, we're trying to replicate that not only with Airbus, but with our supply chain as well. You know, we don't make the mistake of understanding that the shock that we've received due to the rescheduling and cancellation in some cases of orders, we're passing that through to our internal and external supply chains. So yes, we also need to work very carefully and closely with our suppliers. We're supporting ADS with the initiatives in terms of working with UK suppliers in particular to ensure that we safeguard and help them in the future. And we're also working very closely more globally with our supply chains in the US, across Europe, and of course Asia as well.
Right. Can I turn to Alessandro and ask you a bit? You talked about digital technologies, and clearly that's going to have an impact not just on workforces but on suppliers as well. Earlier this week, in an interview with BAE Systems, they were talking that these will have a big impact on these new technologies will have an impact on their supply chain. Can you talk to me a bit about how do you expect to bring your supply chain along with you? And can you really bring them all with you, or do you expect there's going to be a significant upheaval in the supply chain over the next 10 years? Will it look very different? Are your suppliers going to look very different from what they've looked like in the past?
First of all, I think it's important to say that we are working on our supply chain since some years with a project which is called LEAP 2020, LEAP meaning Leonardo Empowering Advanced Partnership. So just to give an idea that for us, to have a strong partnership with our supply chain is fundamental for our long-term sustainability. Because sustainability, in my opinion, is not only the environmental area, which is incredibly important, but there are other areas as well. Clearly, the digital framework is important. We are working with them on having a full integrated system so that all our purchasing activities, but also the planning, the long-term planning we are having with a portion of our supply chain is more and more relevant. One number, just to give you an idea, 80% of our procurement is on 20% of the overall supply chain. So is the queue is pretty long and fragmented. So for sure, we will have a different, in 10 years' time, we'll have a different supply chain structure in the sense that with this 20% and some of the others, we want to have long-term partnership. We are working a lot with the financial system in order to have an integrated support system for them, in order to reduce as well the capital that the banking system has to allocate to this supply chain. And we have also created a training system for our SMEs. The training system is mainly based on internationalization, governance, and financial activities. So it's very important for us to have larger suppliers that will, from which we will buy more, having a weight on their sales which will be lower. So it's important for us. We have a very clear strategic target. We measure KPIs on that. So it's something we are managing in a very detailed way. And I have to say that with COVID has been incredibly important because we have a very clear knowledge of each of them. We had more than 1,300 on-site visits with these suppliers. And really, we have created a control tower in order to know on a daily basis how they are positioned also in terms of financials due to the COVID crisis. For some of them, we put in place a specific support program in order to be sure that they will go through the COVID crisis in a safe way.
Thank you. I mean, very, very quickly, actually, Tony, with your Meggitt hat on, do you think this means the end of, if we're going to have fewer small suppliers, bigger suppliers with greater pricing power, does that mean that suppliers will be better able to resist the price down pressure from the OEMs as a supplier? Do you think you'll be better able to resist that pressure in future?
No, that is one of the big questions in terms of how the supply chain landscape will adapt and shape coming out and through the crisis. But I mean, for most of our members, there are really two key capabilities which ultimately underpin the success of companies in aerospace and defense. The first one is clearly making sure that companies stay at the forefront of technology and are investing sufficiently in that area, and that's why we want to work with government. And at this critical time, we need additional government support to try and continue to feed technology and to have a better gearing environment where government's taking more of the load, given the challenges companies will have to invest in technology themselves. But we have to have the technology that enables planes to be ever more fuel efficient, ever more sustainable, and that's the focus of most aerospace companies. But secondly, you have to be operationally efficient, and we're looking to work with companies, with the help of government, to make sure that companies are becoming ever more competitive, so that they can perform and deliver on time and to the right quality, which is very much a strategic capability in an industry that has very high standards. You have to have both the technology and the ability to deliver it consistently. And that's where ADS has been helping its members with the support of government on some competitiveness schemes, accelerating some of the capabilities in lean manufacturing to make sure that companies are able to succeed and compete in the future landscape. So those two areas.
Just thank you for that. I think I'll move on now to a question about Brexit. A couple of you have mentioned Brexit, and we don't need more problems on top of the COVID crisis. But clearly, the UK ends the transition period just this winter, and we may have a second spike. The industry certainly won't be out of the crisis. I think I'd be interested to hear a bit about how the UK is seen. Is there a risk that we might gradually see that the industry is obviously strapped for cash, having a difficult time, trying to hoard its resources for investment in sustainable energy and other areas? But does that mean that we will see the Airbuses, the Safrans, the Leonardos gradually pulling back to their home countries in order to conserve that cash and investing back in their home countries and starting almost from scratch in that regard? I will go to Victoria. What is your sense about being the sort of UK arm of a French company? Do you sense that risk? Are you worried that you might face that problem? And what are you doing to convince France to carry on investing in you here in the UK post-Brexit?
So for me, the situation is no different than pre-Brexit and pre-coronavirus. So yes, we're part of a global Safran entity who clearly is based in France, but they, as I already said, they invested in the UK in acquiring the business a number of years ago. They continue to invest in the UK throughout the last 2 years. There's been significant investment in our facilities across the UK, not only in Safran seats, but wider than that. Now, yes, of course, as a direct consequence of COVID-19, as I said earlier, we've had to make some adaptations, and that has led to some regrettable issues around reducing headcount. And in fact, in one of our facilities, we've had to make the difficult decision of closing that facility. But that's as a direct consequence of the impact of COVID-19. It's not, as I see it, a lack of confidence in the UK or support of the UK.
Thank you. Guillaume, can I also ask you, I mean, you've been very vocal in the past about, if the UK doesn't support you and your predecessors, if the UK isn't supportive, isn't competitive, there's less of a strong reason for being here. We've seen a lot of help to aerospace sector in France and Germany. We haven't yet seen anything dedicated here. What is your view about the attractiveness of the UK post-Brexit and full crisis?
Yeah, Airbus is a UK company. We're as well a French and a German and Spanish company. We're a European player. We need that contribution from the different countries of Europe to make Airbus what it is today and having a global reach. We think Brexit, or the kind of Brexit we might have by the end of the year, could be an additional challenge to many other challenges, but there are also opportunities. We hope that the UK ecosystem will be more innovative, will be more competitive, and we have a long-term presence in the UK. Yes, France and Germany have been rather quick in their support packages to aviation, and they're very focused on helping us in many perspectives. We are discussing as well in the UK as an aviation branch. The sector is discussing with the government. Airbus is discussing, and we count on Jet Zero. We count on the doubling of the money for R&T to contribute to what I was explaining before, which is the sustained effort on aviation of the future. There's still a huge potential for growth for the aviation, the commercial aviation in the world, provided we do what we have to do in terms of decarbonization, in terms of digitalization. And we see that this is very high on the agenda of the British government, and this makes a lot of sense for us. Therefore, we continue to see the relationship between Airbus and the UK as a successful partnership. We know there is an additional challenge with a potential hard Brexit by the end of the year. We don't like it, but it's one problem among others that we have to solve. And in this current environment, I mean, it's good times for people who like to solve problems, because there are many of them.
Thank you. And Alessandro, I can see you've got something you want to say.
No, I do have a position which is pretty similar to Guillaume one, strongly in favor of having an agreement, even if this would require a postponement. I know that is not today considered, but I think that would be by far better, with an agreement on the defense sector as well, that, as we know, is outside of the perimeter of the discussion. So I think that all of that is important, but as Guillaume was saying, we have 7,000 people there, and we are not only for this reason an UK company. So we have a significant portion of our IP which is UK based. We have a significant portion of our engineering activities which is based in UK. We have the military side of our helicopter division that again is based in UK, and the UK government is strongly supporting our export activities because it's incredibly important for them in terms of prosperity plan. So I think that all these elements are relevant. So I know that both sides, UK and EU, will be pragmatic, and so that hopefully we will find the proper way in order to move forward. The main worries we have is, and I go back to the sustainability issue, is about people. So I hope that UK will continue to be attractive in terms of talents in order to have the possibility to continue to hire strong people in the technical field without having an incredible cost increase. So if they will, if UK will close or will reduce the capability of attracting foreign students, we know that today a huge portion of the STEM students are from outside UK, would become an issue for all of us.
And thank you, Alessandro. Isn't that sort of a prime area, Jackie, just thinking about your hat, your charter hat on, isn't that a prime opportunity for companies who have long complained about a lack of expertise and a lack of skills, which presumably we don't have that skills shortage anymore, but isn't sort of inclusion and diversity one of the answers to this issue about protecting skills that Alessandro is raising, and post-Brexit?
Absolutely, but I think just, obviously Rolls-Royce as a UK company has, along with our peers, has long been investing also in STEM, attracting people, from school age to take an interest in the right subject so that we can bring them in and excite them by opportunities within the business. to solve complex problems, as Guillaume referred to, of which we have many. So yes, absolutely, there has to be opportunity as well to redeploy. But I think the main thing is all of the things that we were already committed to get that pipeline more full of people excited by STEM subjects is as true now as it was pre-COVID.
And BAE, you've made an amazing commitment to hire 800 apprentices this year in the middle of all of this. I know that defence is less affected than other sectors, but your decision to do that and to stick with it when you don't know what defence budgets are going to be. Why did you decide to do that? And also thinking about your supply chain, a lot of the skills are still needed there as well. And what are you doing to actually ensure your suppliers can still benefit from that next generation?
That's a good question, Peggy. I mean, we felt strongly that we had to make the commitment to the young people we see the growth in the business. We fortunately have a strong backlog on long-term programs. And whilst, yes, there may be uncertainty around the long-term future of defence spending, we believe that number, programs such as Dreadnought, Type 26, Tempest, they are long-term, multi-decade programs. So from our perspective, bringing in that fresh talent and making sure that we prepare the people, the generation that we need for the future is equally important today as it was in a pre-COVID world. And that gave us the confidence that we could commit. On the point of suppliers, we have been working closely with our supply chain, and where we can, we've been pre-funding. Globally, we've actually put over £100 million of early funding into our suppliers. And whilst I know that is something we'll have to watch and continue to watch, we are very keen to make sure that the suppliers stay whole through this. We've been working closely with the governments where we've been operating to try and make sure that the cash keeps coming into the business to support the contracts that we're operating against, and then make sure that cash passes through us into the supply chain and keeps the supply chain whole. But I'm not sitting here complacently thinking there won't be challenges. There will most certainly be challenges ahead of us. And back when it comes to young people, some of our academies that we've set up, you're aware, Peggy, that some of our academies, we do open those to our suppliers. And what we're very keen to see is that sort of ecosystem of our apprentices and some of our suppliers working side by side to develop skills together. So it's early careers is something that here in BAE we take extremely seriously. And we firmly believe that even in these difficult times, we need to commit to that long-term future for skills development for young people.
Thank you, Charles. Tony, I think the last question is reserved for you. We've talked about Brexit, we've talked about the next generation and the importance of the future. I've said it earlier, we've seen that France and Germany have made very clear commitments to their aerospace industry. France, €1.5 billion to the next generation, emissions-free jet. The UK has already lost significant market share. It is no longer the world's second after the United States. My question, I suppose, is, are we doing enough here in order to continue enticing inward investment? Are we doing enough to maintain our competitive edge? Is there a risk that we'll fall even further down the ladder?
No, I think, Peggy, that is the big question for the UK. And there's no doubt that the aerospace industry across the UK is obviously under severe stress at the moment as a result of the pandemic and the economic downturn. I would propose this to government really as a huge opportunity for government and industry to come together. And we have phenomenal talent, phenomenal companies and capability right across the UK, from Cornwall right up to the Shetland Islands, that are involved in civil aerospace, defence and space and security programs. And one of the biggest opportunities for the UK is to accelerate the funding that supports essentially this roadmap that we're on towards a sustainable future for civil aviation. And it's very reassuring to hear the government talking about Jet Zero and its ambitions to get very serious in terms of how that can be supported across the industry, both in terms of accelerating investment in technologies today, pulling forward some of those defence programs like Charles and others were talking about on Tempest, and really using the opportunity of the crisis to actually target investment in the sector. As I said right at the start, there's some 375,000 jobs across all of the companies involved in this activity in the UK. This is one sector that absolutely can deliver on both the government's commitment to increase R&D and the benefit of all the intellectual property that creates, but to build the high quality jobs for the manufacturing of those capabilities into the future. So there's an opportunity. We're in close dialogue with the government. We'll be talking to them further this week and hoping to try and accelerate and conclude some of those agreements that we believe are very closely aligned with the ambitions of government and can really get the UK back to that #2 position on the global stage with some of the great companies that you've got that would normally be at the air show, and some of whom are represented on the panel today.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I hope that our listeners, our viewers have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Thank you, everybody, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of virtual Farnborough.